A girl sees a blind millionaire tied up to be devoured by a snake, so she does this. Comment what you thought of this story with a rating from 0 to 10 and tell me which city you're watching from. I really want to know if you liked my story and get to know you better, so please subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. The sun had not yet risen when Emily woke up with her stomach growling from hunger. The 4-year-old girl rubbed her small eyes and looked around the abandoned barn, where she had spent the night, curled up between old feed sacks that smelled of mold. Her bare feet touched the cold, packed earth floor as she stood up, adjusting the dirty little dress that was too big for her thin body. For 3 weeks, Emily had been living alone at Hope Farm on the outskirts of Willow Creek, Georgia. Her parents had abandoned her there on a cold January morning, promising they would be back before nightfall. But the sun set, the moon appeared, and disappeared many times, and they never returned. The farm was partially abandoned, with only a few workers who tended to the distant lands and rarely passed by the area where she hid. Emily learned to survive by scavenging for leftover food she found near the main house, drinking water from the garden hose when no one was looking, and sleeping in hidden corners of the property. Her small hands already knew how to open dented cans she found in the trash, and her sharp ears could detect when someone was approaching so she could hide. That morning, the hunger was more intense than usual. Emily walked barefoot through the dew-damp grass toward the back of the main house where the trash cans were kept. The cold January wind made her little legs tremble, but she was used to the discomfort. Her brown, tangled and dirty hair fell over her shoulders as she carefully rummaged through the trash bags, searching for something edible. That's when she heard the screams. They were desperate, muffled cries coming from the direction of the old snake house at the far end of the property. Emily knew that place well. It was a stone structure that had been used to breed snakes many years ago but was now defunct and abandoned. She always avoided passing by it because she was afraid of the stories she heard about venomous snakes that might still be hiding among the stones. But these screams were different. They were the screams of an adult in danger. Emily dropped the empty corn can she was examining and ran toward the cries. Her small legs carried her quickly over the uneven ground, jumping over puddles of mud and dodging fallen branches. Her heart pounded in her chest as she approached the grey stone building that looked even more somber in the faint morning light. The wooden door of the old snake house was ajar. Emily pushed it slowly, and the loud creak of the rusty hinges echoed in the empty space. The smell of dampness and wet earth filled her nostrils as her eyes adjusted to the dim interior. And then she saw it. In the center of the room, a middle-aged man was tied to an old wooden chair. His formal clothes were torn and dirty, and there were red marks on his wrists where the ropes tightened. His graying hair was disheveled, and his eyes— Emily noticed something strange about his eyes. They seemed not to see. They seemed lost, even when he turned his head in her direction. But what made Emily's blood run cold was what was happening just a few feet from the bound man. A huge eastern diamondback rattlesnake, nearly 6 feet long with a body as thick as an adult's arm, was slithering slowly across the stone floor toward the chair. Its dark skin with diamond-shaped patterns shone faintly in the light coming through the door, and it moved its triangular head from side to side, as if smelling the air, getting closer and closer to the helpless man. The man tried to struggle in the chair, but the ropes were too tight. His muffled screams came through what looked like a cloth tied around his mouth. He couldn't see the snake approaching, but he seemed to feel its presence from the sound of its heavy body dragging across the floor. Emily felt fear rise in her throat, but something stronger than fear took over. That man was in mortal danger, and she was the only one there who could help him. She quickly looked around and saw a thick tree branch lying near the wall. Without a second thought, she picked up the branch with her small hands. It was too heavy for her, but adrenaline gave her muscles extra strength. The rattlesnake was less than 2 feet from the man when Emily approached from behind it. The snake raised its head, sensing the girl's presence, and opened its mouth to show its venomous fangs while emitting a threatening rattling sound. Emily swallowed hard, but didn't back down. With all the strength she could muster, she slammed the branch on the floor right next to the snake, making a sharp, loud noise that echoed through the building. The rattlesnake was startled and retreated a few feet, coiling its body in a defensive position. The girl slammed the branch again, this time closer to the snake, shouting in her high-pitched voice for it to go away. The rattlesnake, intimidated by the noise and movement, decided the confrontation wasn't worth it and moved away toward a crack in the stone wall, disappearing among the rocks. Only then did Emily drop the heavy branch and run to the tied-up man. Her small hands trembled as she tried to untie the ropes binding his wrists, but the knots were too tight for her little fingers to undo. Sir, are you okay?" she asked in her childish voice, trying to remove the cloth covering his mouth. When she finally managed to remove the gag, the man took a deep breath, coughing and trying to catch his breath. His eyes, which Emily now realized were blue and seemed not to see properly, filled with tears of relief. "My little one," he said in a hoarse, emotional voice, "you saved my life. What's your name?" "Emily," she replied shyly, still working on the knots of the ropes. "Emily, my angel," the man murmured, "I am Arthur Barrington. This is my farm, and you just saved me from a terrible situation." As Emily finally managed to loosen one of the ropes, allowing Arthur to move one of his hands to help free himself completely, she had no idea that she had just saved one of the wealthiest men in the region, nor did she imagine that this morning would change her life forever. But she also didn't know that, at that very moment, someone was watching from a distance through the window of the main house, someone who was not at all pleased to see that Arthur Barrington had survived. 2 hours after the rescue, Emily was sitting in the kitchen of the main house, watching with wide eyes the amount of food being placed in front of her. Fresh bread, warm milk, scrambled eggs, sweet fruits, more food than she had seen in weeks. Her small hands trembled with excitement as she ate slowly, trying not to show how hungry she was. Arthur Barrington had insisted on taking her inside the house as soon as he managed to free himself completely from the ropes. On the way from the old snake house to the main residence, he carefully held her hand, moving with a caution that Emily was beginning to understand. His blue eyes didn't follow the movements around him, and he would tap his foot before each step. "Mrs. Gable," Arthur had said to the elderly woman who cared for the house, "prepare a warm bath for our little heroine and set aside some clean clothes. And please make the best breakfast you can." Mrs. Gable, a 60-year-old woman with grey hair tied in a bun, had looked at Emily with a mixture of surprise and compassion. The girl was dirty, too thin, with torn clothes and bruised feet. It was obvious she had spent a long time alone and abandoned. "My goodness," Mrs. Gable murmured as she helped Emily sit at the table. "Where did this child come from, Mr. Arthur?" "She saved my life, Mrs. Gable. Literally," replied Arthur, sitting carefully in the chair next to Emily, his hands patting the table to orient himself. "And now I need to understand how such a little girl was alone on my property." As Emily ate, Arthur spoke to her in a gentle tone, trying to find out her story. The girl, between bites, told him about her parents who had promised to return, about the cold nights in the barn, about how she had learned to find food in the trash. They said they were going to work in a city far away and would be back before the moon got round again. Emily explained in her childish voice, pointing to the window, "But the moon has been round 3 times and they haven't come back." Arthur felt his heart ache. 3 full moons meant almost 3 months. A 4-year-old child had survived alone for 3 months on his property, and he didn't even know she existed. "And where were you sleeping, my little one?" he asked, his voice filled with emotion. "In the back barn. There are some sacks that are warm," Emily replied, drinking the milk with pleasure. "And when it rains a lot, I stay under the stairs of the old house." Mrs. Gable and Arthur exchanged worried glances. The man ran a hand through his grey hair, processing the situation. As a successful businessman, even after losing his sight in an accident 3 years ago, he was used to solving complex problems, but this was different. It was an abandoned, vulnerable child who had saved his life. That's when they heard the sound of a car arriving at the property. Arthur stiffened in his chair, immediately recognizing the sound of the engine. It was Claire's car. "That must be Claire arriving," said Mrs. Gable, getting up to look out the window. "Wow, she looks angry. It's like she's seen a ghost." Claire Menezes entered the kitchen with hurried steps, her high heels clicking loudly on the ceramic floor. She was a 28-year-old woman, slim, with impeccably styled blonde hair and expensive clothes that contrasted with the rural environment of the farm. Her green eyes narrowed when she saw Emily sitting at the table. "Uncle Arthur, thank God you're okay," she exclaimed, but her voice sounded forced, artificial. "When I didn't find you in bed this morning, I was desperate. Where were you?" "I had a little problem at the back of the property," Arthur replied vaguely, "but our little friend here helped me." Claire looked at Emily with an expression the girl couldn't decipher. There was something cold in those green eyes, something that made Emily instinctively shrink in her chair. "And who is this child?" Claire asked, pronouncing the word child, as if it had a bad taste in her mouth. "This is Emily," Arthur said affectionately, "and she'll be staying with us for a while. She's alone and needs care." "Staying with us?" Claire's voice went up a pitch. "Uncle, you can't just pick up children from the street. There are legal procedures, proper authorities." "Claire," Arthur's voice became firm, "this child saved my life today, and she is obviously in a state of abandonment. I will not turn my back on her." Emily watched the adults' argument with wide, attentive eyes. Even at 4 years old, she could feel the tension in the air. Claire seemed very angry, and her hands were clenched into fists. Mrs. Gable continued to prepare more food, but her movements were tense, as if she also felt that something was wrong. "Uncle?" Claire tried to soften her tone, approaching Arthur and placing a hand on his shoulder. "You need to think clearly. Your condition, your visual impairment, is not ideal for caring for a small child." "My blindness does not affect my ability to discern what is right," Arthur retorted firmly. Claire took a deep breath, clearly struggling to control her irritation. Her eyes turned again to Emily, who was finishing her meal. The girl felt a chill run up her spine under that gaze. "Of course, Uncle. You always know what's best," Claire said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "But perhaps we should arrange things properly, check if any family is looking for her, arrange for medical exams." "That can be done without rush," Arthur replied. "For now, she stays here." At that moment, Claire's cell phone rang. She looked at the screen, and her expression changed quickly. "I need to take this. It's from the office," she said, hurrying out of the kitchen. Mrs. Gable approached Arthur as soon as they were alone. "Mr. Arthur," she said in a low voice, "not to meddle where I shouldn't, but Miss Claire didn't seem at all happy about the girl's presence." "I noticed," Arthur murmured, running a hand over his tired face. "But Claire will have to accept it. Emily stays." Outside the kitchen, leaning against the hallway wall, Claire spoke on the phone in a low, urgent voice. "Julian, we have a problem. Arthur escaped. No, he didn't die. Even worse, he's shown up with a child he wants to adopt. Yes, that complicates everything. Or you need to get here now. Our plans have to change." Emily had finished eating and was playing with a piece of bread, turning it into small animals with her skillful little hands. Arthur listened to the small sounds she made, low whispers as she created stories for her crumb creations. "Emily," he said gently, "would you like to see your new room?" The girl's eyes lit up. "I'm going to have my own room." "Yes, you are, my little one. Mrs. Gable has already prepared everything for you." While Mrs. Gable took Emily to see the room, a small but cozy space with a single bed, light wood furniture, and a window overlooking the garden, Arthur remained in the kitchen, lost in thought. Something was wrong. Deeply wrong. He couldn't clearly remember how he had ended up tied to that chair in the old snake house. His last memories of the previous night were fuzzy, hazy. He remembered drinking the tea that Claire always prepared for him before bed, and then nothing. But one thing he knew for sure: if it weren't for Emily, he would be dead. And now, watching Claire's reaction to the girl's presence, he began to wonder if his accident had been accidental at all. In the room, Emily looked in awe at the bed with clean sheets and soft pillows. It had been so long since she had slept in a real bed that she had forgotten what it felt like. "Thank you, Mrs. Gable," she said in her small but sincere voice. "Of course, dear. You deserve much more than this," the woman replied, adjusting the curtains. "And don't worry about Miss Claire. She gets nervous sometimes, but she'll get used to you." But when Mrs. Gable left the room, Emily stood at the window looking at the garden, and something caught her attention. Outside, near the back of the property, she saw Claire talking animatedly with a man in a suit she didn't know. They were gesturing a lot, and even though she couldn't hear what they were saying, Emily could tell they were discussing something very serious. What she didn't know was that the man was Julian Ferraz, the family accountant, and that at that very moment they were planning a way to get rid of both Arthur and her. 3 weeks had passed since Emily arrived at the main house of the farm, and the girl's life had completely transformed. For the first time in months, she slept in a warm bed, ate regular meals, and had clean clothes every day. Mrs. Gable had grown deeply fond of the child, teaching her to help in the kitchen and telling her old local stories during the rainy afternoons. Arthur had also developed a fatherly affection for Emily. Every morning after breakfast, he would sit with her on the porch and listen to her imaginative stories, her innocent observations about the garden birds, and her plans for the day. The girl's presence had brought a joy he hadn't felt since before the accident that left him blind. But Claire was growing increasingly irritated. That February morning, she watched from the office window as Arthur and Emily walked through the garden. The man carefully held the child's small hand, letting her guide him among the flowers and fruit trees. The domestic and loving scene made Claire's stomach churn with anger. "This can't go on," she muttered, clenching her fists. In recent days, she had noticed worrying changes in Arthur's behavior. He seemed more alert, less confused, and questioned her decisions about the family business more often. Worse still, he had started asking to personally review some important documents, something he hadn't done in months. Claire knew that her actions were slowly being discovered. The plan she had meticulously executed over the past year, discreetly transferring Arthur's assets to her own name, taking advantage of his condition and the trust he placed in her, was at risk. She picked up her cell phone and dialed a familiar number. "Julian, I need you to come here this afternoon. We have to accelerate our plans," she said in a low voice. "The situation is becoming untenable." On the other end of the line, Julian Ferraz sighed heavily. "Claire, we've talked about this. We can't rush things. If we push too hard, he might become definitively suspicious." "He's already suspicious," she hissed. "Yesterday, he asked me to bring the bank statements for the last 6 months. He said he wanted to better understand the farm's expenses." "And did you show him?" "I managed to stall, made up a story that the papers were at the lawyer's office. But I won't be able to put it off for much longer." While Claire conspired on the phone, Emily, played in the garden with Arthur, completely oblivious to the dangers surrounding her. The girl had created a game where she pretended to be Arthur's eyes, describing everything around him with vivid details that made the man smile. "Mr. Arthur, there's a yellow butterfly sitting on the red rose," she said excitedly. "It's moving its little wings very slowly, like it's dancing." "And how do you think it's feeling?" asked Arthur, genuinely interested in the child's perspective. "I think it's happy because it found a pretty flower to rest on," Emily replied philosophically. "Just like me when I found you." The girl's words deeply touched Arthur's heart. For years after the accident, he had felt useless, dependent, a burden to those around him. But Emily made him feel needed again, important in someone's life. "Emily," he said affectionately, "you know you can stay here with me forever, right? This is your home now." The girl's eyes shone with joy. "Forever and ever? Even if my parents come back?" The innocent question made Arthur hesitate. He knew that legally he would have to hand Emily over to her biological parents if they appeared, but something in his heart rebelled against the idea. What kind of parents abandon a 4-year-old child on an unknown farm? "We'll talk about that if they show up," he said diplomatically. "For now, you are my daughter of the heart." That afternoon, while Emily napped in her room, Claire received Julian in the living room of the house. The accountant was a thin, nervous man of 35 who sweated excessively when he was anxious. That day, his dress shirt already had sweat stains under the arms. "Claire, we need to be more cautious," he said, wiping his forehead with a handkerchief. "My office is being investigated by the IRS. If they find the irregularities in Arthur's documents, that's why we have to speed things up," she interrupted impatiently. "How long do you think you can hold off the investigation?" 2 months at most. After that, everything will come to light." Claire walked to the window and watched Arthur reading a book in Braille on the porch. The sight of him concentrated, seemingly oblivious to everything, gave her a sinister idea. "What if he had another accident?" she murmured. Julian choked. "Claire, are you talking about—" "I'm talking about solving the problem once and for all," she said, coldly. "A domestic accident. Blind people have accidents all the time. And the child is an inconvenient witness. She would have to disappear too." Julian turned pale. "Claire, this is insane. It's one thing to manipulate papers, but it's completely different to—" "To what?" She turned to him with flaming eyes. "Do you think I'm going to let years of planning go down the drain because of an abandoned little girl?" At that moment, they heard light footsteps in the hallway. Claire quickly changed her tone of voice. "So it's decided, Julian, you'll get the new contracts ready by Friday," she said loudly, faking a business conversation. Emily appeared at the living room door, rubbing her sleepy eyes. "Miss Claire, where is Mr. Arthur?" "On the porch," Claire replied with a forced smile. "Why don't you go play in your room? The adults are talking." The girl nodded and walked away, but something about the conversation she had overheard bothered her. She couldn't understand all the words, but Claire's tone of voice had changed completely when she appeared. Later that night, after Julian had left, Claire prepared Arthur's usual tea. It was a routine she had established months ago, claiming that the herbal tea helped him sleep better. What Arthur didn't know was that Claire had been adding mild sedatives to the drink, keeping him in a constant state of drowsiness that made it easier to manipulate his mind. But that night, she decided to increase the dosage. "Your tea, Uncle," she said sweetly, handing him the steaming cup. Arthur thanked her and drank the tea as he always did. But this time, a few minutes later, he began to feel strangely dizzy. "Claire," he murmured, putting a hand to his forehead, "I don't feel well." "It must be the day's fatigue," she said, feigning concern. "I'll help you to your room." As Claire helped Arthur walk down the hall, Emily watched from her half-open door. Something was wrong with the scene. Mr. Arthur was never so wobbly, even being blind. And the smile on Claire's face, it wasn't a nice smile. After Claire put Arthur in bed and made sure he was sleeping soundly, she returned to the kitchen and began to wash the teacup. Emily, curious and worried, silently left her room and hid behind the kitchen door. That's when she saw Claire take a small medicine bottle from her purse, read the label carefully, and put it away again. The girl couldn't read, but she could see that there were drawings of skulls on the label, the same symbol Mrs. Gable had taught her meant danger. Claire was putting dangerous things in Mr. Arthur's tea. Emily ran back to her room, her heart pounding in her chest. She had to protect Mr. Arthur. But how? Who would believe a 4-year-old girl against an adult? The next day, Emily tried to tell Mrs. Gable what she had seen, but the woman interpreted her words as childish imagination. "Oh, child," Mrs. Gable said, laughing. "What's this story? Miss Claire just wants to take good care of Mr. Arthur." Frustrated, Emily decided she would have to act on her own. That night, when it was time for tea, she hid in the hallway and waited. As always, Claire prepared the drink and took it to Arthur in the living room. But when she left to take a call, Emily seized the opportunity. She ran to the table, grabbed the teacup, and poured the entire contents into the pot of the plant next to it. Then she ran to the kitchen, filled the cup with warm water, and put it back in the same place. When Claire returned and offered the tea to Arthur, he drank only slightly warm water. That night, for the first time in months, Arthur slept naturally, without sedatives. But Claire soon realized that something was wrong. The next day, Arthur was more alert, asked more questions, seemed less confused. She discreetly checked the plant pot and found traces of dark liquid in the soil. Someone had discovered her secret, and she had a strong suspicion who it was. The next morning, Claire woke up with a grim determination. She knew Emily was interfering with her plans, and that could not continue. As she watched the girl having breakfast with Arthur in the kitchen, her green eyes shone with a calculated coldness. "Uncle," she said in a honeyed voice, approaching the table, "I've been thinking about Emily's situation. Perhaps we should find a more suitable family for her." Arthur stopped eating and turned his face toward Claire. "What do you mean, more suitable?" "Well, you have your limitations, and I work a lot. A small child needs constant care, full-time attention. I know a family in Atlanta that would be perfect for her." Emily felt a pit in her stomach. She didn't understand all the words, but she understood that Claire wanted to send her away. "I don't want to go away," she said in her trembling little voice, clinging to Arthur's arm. "Claire!" Arthur's voice became firm. "We've already discussed this. Emily stays here. This is her home now. Uncle, be reasonable. You can't..." "Can't what?" Arthur stood up from the chair, and even though he was blind, his posture radiated authority. "Care for a child? Give love and protection to someone who needs it?" Claire realized she had touched a raw nerve. In recent days, since Arthur had stopped taking the sedatives, he had become increasingly questioning, more present. It was as if a fog had lifted from his mind. "Of course, that's not it," she backpedaled quickly. "I'm just concerned for everyone's well-being." That afternoon, while Arthur rested and Emily played in the garden, Claire made a crucial call. "Dr. Reynolds, this is Claire Meneses. I need you to come and do an evaluation on my uncle today." "Yes, a psychiatric evaluation. He has been exhibiting strange behaviors, hallucinations." Dr. Reynolds was a 48-year-old doctor who had accumulated gambling debts and was willing to do anything for money. Claire had used his services before to get prescriptions for controlled drugs. "How much are you willing to pay?" he asked directly. "Enough to pay off your debts," she replied coldly. "But I need the report to be specific. He needs to be declared incapable of managing his own affairs." 2 hours later, Dr. Reynolds arrived at the farm. Claire greeted him personally and took him to Arthur, who was in the library organizing his Braille books. "Uncle, I brought Dr. Reynolds for a checkup. It's been a while since you've had a full medical evaluation." Arthur frowned. He felt fine, more lucid than he had in months. He saw no need for medical exams. "Dr. Reynolds," he said politely, "I appreciate the visit, but I don't think it's necessary." "Mr. Arthur," the doctor interrupted in a professional voice, "your niece is concerned about some symptoms you've been showing. Mental confusion, memory loss, hallucinations." "Hallucinations?" Arthur turned to Claire, bewildered. "What hallucinations? Uncle, you've been talking about things that didn't happen. You've been paranoid, suspicious." Claire lied shamelessly. Emily, who was playing outside the library, heard the conversation through the open window. Even without fully understanding, she realized that Claire was saying bad things about Mr. Arthur. Dr. Reynolds spent the next hour asking Arthur leading questions, trying to confuse him and make him seem mentally incompetent. But Arthur answered everything with lucidity and intelligence, thwarting Claire's plans. "I need to speak with you in private," the doctor told Claire after the exam. In the office, Dr. Reynolds got straight to the point. "Claire, I can't sign a false report. Your uncle is perfectly lucid and mentally capable." "Doctor, we had an agreement," she hissed, her eyes glinting dangerously. "I know, but this is forgery. If it's discovered—" Claire opened the desk drawer and pulled out a thick envelope full of money. $50,000, she said. "That's 3 times what you owe the loan sharks." Dr. Reynolds looked at the money, sweating coldly. His debts were growing, and the collectors had threatened his family. I need to think," he murmured. "There's no time to think," Claire said impatiently. "Either you sign the report or your financial problems become definitively irreversible." It was at this moment that Emily, who had followed the 2 adults and was listening behind the door, decided to act. She ran to the library where Arthur was still organizing his books. "Mr. Arthur, Mr. Arthur," she shouted, pulling on his shirt. "Miss Claire is doing bad things with the doctor." "Calm down, little one," said Arthur, crouching down to her level. "Tell me what you saw." In her childish language, Emily tried to explain the conversation she had overheard, about the money, about Claire wanting the doctor to write bad things about him. Arthur listened attentively, and the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place in his mind. The mental confusion he had been experiencing, the way Claire always insisted he drink his tea, the financial decisions she claimed to have made for his benefit. "Emily," he said gravely, "can you lead me to the office without making a sound?" The girl took his hand and guided him silently down the hall. When they got near the office door, they could clearly hear the conversation. "If you don't sign the report, you'll have much bigger problems than debts," Claire was saying. "I have contacts who can make your life very difficult." All right, Dr. Reynolds said in a defeated voice. "I'll sign it, but after this I want nothing more to do with you." Arthur had heard enough. He pushed open the office door and walked in with Emily. "What an interesting conversation," he said in an icy voice. Claire and Dr. Reynolds turned, pale with fright. The doctor dropped the papers he was holding. "Uncle, we were just discussing your treatment," Claire stammered. "You were discussing how to declare me mentally incompetent in exchange for money," Arthur retorted. "I heard everything." Dr. Reynolds tried to leave the room, but Arthur blocked his path. "Doctor, I think we have a lot to talk about, especially about who else is involved in this scheme." Pressured and desperate, Dr. Reynolds began to talk. He confessed about the false reports he had signed for Claire, about other elderly people who had been victims of the same scam, about Julian Faraz and the entire network of corruption. "Claire is not your niece," he finally revealed. "She took advantage of your blindness to pose as a relative. Her real name is Claire Santos, and she is a professional con artist." Arthur felt as if the floor had disappeared from under his feet. woman he had trusted for years, who managed his business, whom he considered family, was a criminal. Claire, realizing that all was lost, made a final desperate attempt. She grabbed a knife from the drawer and pointed it at Emily. "No one is going to prove anything," she said with a crazed voice, "and if any of you open your mouths—" But Claire had underestimated Mrs. Gable, who at that moment entered the office carrying a coffee tray and saw the scene. The elderly lady did not hesitate. She threw the hot tray at Claire, causing her to drop the knife and scream in pain. In the days that followed, the whole truth came to light. Julian Ferraz and Claire were arrested. Dr. Reynolds had his medical license revoked, but in exchange for his cooperation, he received a lighter sentence. Arthur's assets were recovered, and more importantly, he discovered something that would change his life forever. During the investigation of the forged documents, it was revealed that Arthur and his late wife, Marcella, had indeed had a daughter 20 years ago. The child had been declared as not having survived the birth, but was actually sold to a family who mistreated her until she ran away to the streets. When investigators brought the old medical records from the maternity ward, they discovered that the baby had a very specific birthmark on her right shoulder, exactly like the one Emily had. The blood test confirmed what Arthur's heart already knew. Emily was his lost daughter, who had come home in the most unlikely way possible, saving his life just as he had saved hers. On the farm's porch, as the sun set over the Georgia mountains, Arthur held Emily in his lap, finally understanding why he had felt such a strong connection to this brave little girl from the very first moment. "Daddy," Emily said for the first time, the word coming naturally from her lips. "My daughter," he replied, tears of happiness streaming down his face. "My little warrior who brought me back to life." Together, the reunited father and daughter transformed Hope Farm into a true home, proving that sometimes love finds the most extraordinary paths to bring together those who belong to each other. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to my channel. I promise to bring you videos every day that will make your life happier. Comment what you thought of my story with a rating from 0 to 10, and thank you so much.